When the Apple iPhone came out, I could not imagine that studying its interesting features would lead to me discovering my wife's infidelity. Unfortunately, this is exactly what happened. I think now is a good time to describe my wife, Jayana. Jan was what we called a California blonde at my school. Long bleached hair, dark bronze skin tone from year-round visits to tanning salons, long slender legs and large breasts in Jayana's case. It was size 36DD. In short, she was incredibly beautiful, and although I was often told that I, too, was quite handsome, I felt incredibly lucky that I was able to conquer such a woman. Looking back, Jaina and I were very happy. Honestly, it was the fact that I was caught off guard that made it so painful and made me so angry. We were married for 9 happy years and had 2 children, an 8-year-old son, Aiden, and a 4-year-old daughter, Eva. We met and started dating in college, getting married shortly after I graduated with a degree in communications. Jan got pregnant a few months later, leaving school with a certificate in office skills, completing the courses she had already taken for her diploma. I started working right after graduation at a small regional college in Cape Town, which was close to our hometown. We settled there and Jan got a job as an administrative assistant at an insurance company when Aiden was 1 year old. 6 years and 1 beautiful daughter later, I became director of communications at Charles Francis College, and Jan is still happily working for the same company in the same position. Since I often worked with graphic templates for college, one of my first graduation purchases was a nice desktop Mac. Jan, I initially thought it was wasteful until I started playing with photo editing programs myself. Very quickly, it became not only my Mac, but also her Mac, which I could use from time to time. Photography has always been Jana's great passion. Every event or trip was accompanied by her camera. Of course, this passion only intensified when she became a mother, and our house quickly became an art gallery, with the walls of every room filled with printed photographs of varying sizes. A few years later, one of my coworkers' wives introduced Jayana to the art of scrapbooking photo albums designed like real works of art with beautiful paper, stickers, cut-out cardboard letters, and other embellishments. Already interested in photography, I easily became interested in this too, spending a lot of money on materials and even attending master classes and drops. At first, I didn't even know what crop was, thinking that it was something related to agriculture. It turns out that scrapbooking is when a group of people gather in one place, usually a church basement or local center, and work on their scrapbooks together while communicating. Alcohol was even allowed at some of these meetings. At first, I was concerned about this new hobby of Jayana, but I soon changed my mind. It made her happy and gave her a break from her family in a positive way, unlike when Aiden was a baby. I missed Jayana when she went on her crops, which sometimes lasted an entire weekend, disrupting our Saturday dates. However, such trips were no more than twice a year, and usually only once a month on Fridays. The kids and I waited until Saturday morning to see her new work. On that same ill-fated Friday, I had just put the children to bed while I was on my next monthly crop. There were no sports on TV, and I didn't feel like watching movies or shows. After making sure the kids were asleep, I went to our bedroom-turned office and decided to relax a little by watching some adult videos on my Mac. As I mentioned earlier, the Apple iPhone had just come out at that time, and of course, I just couldn't resist. I was still using a BlackBerry, which was the only real smartphone at the time. I got my iPhone literally the day before, downloading a bunch of music there so I could listen to it on my crop instead of my iPod. So, I was already in the process of watching the video when suddenly a notification popped up in the upper right corner of the screen. Jalen, Urs is so cute. Are you going to sleep with him? I'm already taking mine home. At that time, I did not know, and of course, also, an iPhone synced with a Mac can display a messages received from another iPhone directly on the computer screen. At first second, I didn't even understand what was happening, but I was extremely dissatisfied with the fact that Jan corresponds with Jalen. Jaylene was an old friend of Jayana's from college who couldn't stand me because, in her words, I stole her party partner. Jalen was one of those arrogant women who thought she was much more beautiful than she really was. In my opinion, her nose was too big, as well as belly fat and massive hips. She believed that hot girls like her didn't need to spend money on drinks. She went to clubs, flirted to get cocktails, and then chose one of her suitors for the night. Okay, her life is her business. But what annoyed me was that she wanted Jan helped her get attention. Soon after our engagement, Jan promised me that she would stop going to clubs with Jaylene without me. Either I accompanied her or she stayed at home. This led to Jaylene's hysterics, and she didn't speak to Jaina for several years, even missing our wedding, where she was supposed to be a bridesmaid. From then on, I never heard the name Jalen until Aiden was a baby. Jan decided she needed some adult time, and I looked after our son while she went out with her friends. I completely trusted my wife at the time, so I didn't attach any importance to it. But one day she returned home a little drunk, and the next time she was already very drunk, with some man's number written on her hand. When I asked her what that meant, just as I was about to pack up my things and leave, she replied, "I didn't do anything. I just danced with him. I was with Jaylene." After 3 of the hardest weeks of our marriage, I finally forgave her, but I set strict rules. The main one was no communication with Jaylene. Once again, Jaylene made a scene and then cut ties with Jaina completely, which was fine with me. As the years passed, I was sure that Jaylene had disappeared from our lives forever, until that very same tooltip appeared on the screen. Like I said, the message itself from Jaylene made me instantly angry. But before I could understand the meaning of the first message, a second message arrived. "Jalen, you're a dirty girl, okay? Have fun. I want to hear the details." At that moment, my excitement disappeared, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured on me. I hastily adjusted my pants and began to figure out how I was seeing these messages on the computer. Most of all, I wanted to know what Dee answers Jan when asked if she is going to sleep with this honey. I managed to open her a message folder where there was only one correspondence with Jaylene. My heart sank as I began to read the 30 or so messages between them. Jan I originally planned to meet Jalen at the club opposite the place where the crop took place. Moreover, it was clear from the messages that this was not the first time. My hands were shaking with anger as I flipped through the dialogue to the very last exchange. "Jalen, Urs is so cute. Are you going to sleep with him? I'm already taking mine home." Jan, "Maybe. Just kidding, lol. Just dancing with him a little after I finish this cocktail. He's a great kisser." Jalen, "You're a dirty girl. Okay, have fun. I want to hear the details. T-tile." Jan, "T-tile. What happened next would make me look like the worst dad ever, but I was so angry that I just couldn't think straight. I double-checked that Aiden and Eve were still asleep and went by car to find Jaina at the club. At that moment, I thought that I would leave for a maximum of 40 minutes and nothing would happen to them. Yes, I know that I could have had an accident or 100 other troubles would have happened, but then I was not in a state to assess the situation sensibly. When I pulled up to the club and the center where the crop was taking place, I parked in the loading area for 20 minutes at the center and ran across the road. I was lucky that there was no line, another thing I didn't even think about at the time, and I was able to get in straight away. The small club wasn't crowded, but there were enough people that I had a hard time finding Jaina. I walked around the room 3 times and was about to give up when I noticed 2 men coming out of the restroom. Their grins and looks back gave me a strange feeling. Let's call it intuition. As soon as I entered the toilet, I immediately heard sounds from one of the stalls, the characteristic sounds of 2 people having sex. There was one voice I instantly recognized. It was Jan. I could see from their shoes that they were in the first stall closest to the door. Containing my rage, I carefully climbed onto the toilet in the next stall to swallow from above. As angry as I was, the sight I saw literally knocked me off my feet. This guy was clearly younger than me, but not taller, and he also had a slight beer belly. His face is unremarkable, covered in acne scars. It was like a slap in the face, Jan cheated on me with such a person. Trying to contain my emotions, I quickly took several pictures with my phone, including one where it was clear that he was not using protection. This was the final touch that finished me off. I had the procedure and couldn't have any more children, and Jan didn't take any pills. At that moment, the guy raised his head and noticed me. His face frowned and he shouted, "Get out of here before I punch your face in." At this moment, she also looked up. I got one last shot of her shocked face before she screamed. I don't know what she screamed because I immediately jumped off and ran out of the club in a matter of seconds. I didn't see her bag, and following my intuition, I returned across the road to the center where the crop was taking place. There were about 20 women sitting in the hall, working on their albums. I noticed Jaina's empty desk and her bag underneath, partially hidden behind her work supplies. I waved to Brenda, my coworker's wife, who had introduced Jaina to scrapbooking, and picked up the bag. Brenda frowned, probably realizing that Jan did something, but didn't say anything. I checked that her wallet, bank card, and keys were there and left, taking her bag with me. I drove home, knowing that I had little time before Jaina returned. On the way, I received several messages, but I turned off the phone. When I returned, the children, fortunately, were still sleeping. I sat down at my Mac and quickly copied the photos to a USB drive. Rewatching them was just as painful as seeing it live. I became angry and went to Facebook, where her password was saved. I posted a photo of the guy, as well as a photo of her shocked expression, with the caption, "I'm a soon-to-be divorced cheater." I quickly packed 2 suitcases, knowing that Jan, most likely, will return soon. I hesitated whether to take the children, but decided that they would have enough shocks. My main goal was to leave so as not to talk to Jaina. I loaded my suitcases into the truck and waited in it, leaving the engine running. I kept looking either at the street, waiting for Jaina, or at the house, in case one of the children woke up. A couple of times I was about to leave, mistaking the movements on the street for her approach, but these were false alarms. Finally, I saw a taxi pull up and Jan came out. She noticed me and started waving her arms, but I just stepped on the gas and drove away, looking at her desperate attempts to stop me in the rearview mirror. The next 4 months were a blur. I absolutely refused to meet Jaina in person, but I was able to arrange a move and moved into my elderly parents' basement. I was a late child, born to my parents when they were over 40. They still lived in our hometown, a 2-hour drive from my former home. During these 4 months, I was able to see Aiden and Eva 3 times during the day, under the supervision of my parents. I hired a lawyer and was warned that if I filed for divorce, things would not turn out well for me in terms of finances and custody, even despite evidence of infidelity. After a long conversation with my parents, who allowed me to stay with them for free until I got back on my feet, I decided to go all the way. Regardless of the consequences, I could no longer remain married to Jaina. For me, it was a second and last chance, after which there was no turning back. Although I avoided meeting in person when I finally decided to file for divorce, I felt that after almost 10 years of marriage, I should tell Jaina about it myself. Our phone conversation was full of her tears and pleas for forgiveness, while I was holding back not to hang up. She said all the platitudes. This would never happen again. She was drunk and wasn't thinking clearly, and that Jalen influenced her. The most painful moment was when Jan admitted that she became pregnant that night, but terminated the pregnancy during our separation. I just told her it was over and forbade her to contact me. If anything happened to the children, she was supposed to contact my parents. For all other questions, only through my lawyer. Exactly 4 months after the night I found her, Jan received notice of divorce at home. How I survived 4 years of living in my parents' basement is still a mystery to me. I think it was difficult for them, especially my father, to understand that my return home did not mean that I had to be raised again. I didn't need lectures about staying late or not coming home on weekends. I certainly didn't need a reminder that my new job was a dead end. I got a job as a spotter and my salary was a little over 60% of what I was earning before. It served as a constant reminder of where I ended up. However, I couldn't complain. My parents actually provided me with free room and board so I could pay child support and save up money to start over. Since Jan got primary custody of the kids, she stayed in our house, and I continued to pay the mortgage for 5 years unless she married another lucky guy. I prayed for it to happen, but it never did. Everything turned out exactly as I had predicted before filing for divorce, but I chose self-respect over financial well-being. For my children, not a day went by that I didn't feel guilty that they had to go through this. But I always remembered that Dee was to blame for this Jan. To her credit, she could have been much worse when it came to custody issues. She let me spend Easter, Christmas, and Thanksgiving with Aiden and Eve on alternate days, and they moved into my parents' house for the entire summer. We tried to enjoy the time we spent together. I never asked them how their mother was doing. I wish I could say I didn't care, but the truth is that it was easier not to think about her at all. Unfortunately, sometimes during meetings I would become angry and say something bad about Gianna. Eva looked at me in surprise, and Aiden looked straight into my eyes with the same anger as mine. I usually said something like, "I shouldn't have said that in front of you," but I never apologized. In the end, I was sure that Jan said much worse about me. As you can imagine, living at home, stuck in what was essentially a desk job, was not the best way to find a new life partner. I went out, mostly with friends from school, and had my own fleeting romances. However, I have never met a woman who was even remotely as beautiful, smart, or funny as Jan in our best times. When you get used to eating filet mignon every day, it's hard to resign yourself to just pork chops. Also, I stopped taking care of myself. I started drinking too much beer, eating junk food, and no longer going to the gym several times a week. In fact, the only thing that reminded me of working out after moving home was chasing the neighbor's poodle when he ran away. I was definitely no longer someone who was noticed before. As 40 began to creep up on me, I began to accept that I would probably never get married again. Although my parents talked to Gianna at least once every 2 weeks to let me know how Aiden and Eva were doing or to arrange for me to call the kids, they said almost nothing about her. I knew they both thought I was being stupid, avoiding my ex-wife, and still holding a grudge after all these years. However, they were tactful enough not to turn this into one of their notations. One Friday, everything seemed to go wrong. I was informed that I was going to be fired from my lousy job at an independent publishing house. I was told to pack my things, and the remaining days of vacation were counted as notice. This meant that I could find myself in a situation where I could not pay child support. I dealt with the news of finding a job during the recession by going to a bar alone and drinking myself into oblivion. The next day, at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I struggled upstairs, where I saw my father frowning at the newspaper. I'm already pretty tired of his facial expression. I sighed and raised my hands. "Okay, go ahead, lay it out." "What?" muttered my father, glancing briefly at me over the newspaper. "You're going to say it anyway. Just finish it quickly." My father sighed loudly through his nose. "Well, Todd, I don't think you understand that this is not Jan punishes you, you punish yourself. It was you who let yourself go. It was you who stayed in the job you hate. It's you who can't get over what happened. There is nothing wrong with forgiving Gianna and moving on." "Well," I answered sarcastically, since my hangover did not improve my mood, "for starters, I just got fired from that job that I hate so much. And this, by the way, may well lead to the fact that Jan will really punish me again when I can't pay her child support. As for the fact that I let myself go, you probably understand this better than anyone. You should know that as you get older, everything starts to fall apart. I'm sure, Jan, over the years, I have also gained a couple of kilograms." At that moment, my mother came into the room, giggled, and playfully slapped my father, causing the newspaper to drop enough for me to see a huge smile on his face. "Crazy," his mother teased with a grin, rolling her eyes. My father laughed and looked at me. I just shook my head in exasperation, not having the slightest idea what they were having so much fun about. "I scolded your father because he probably remembered the time when we took the children back home in August," said my mother with a sly look. Your charming ex-wife clearly wasn't expecting us so early and was sunbathing in the backyard. Believe me, this woman is still in as good shape as ever in what can't even be called a bikini. Then I spanked your father too for staring at her ass. Hey, I was just watching to talk, out of politeness. The father justified himself. And she is far from you at her age. My father blew a kiss to my mother, and they both laughed again. I was not delighted and just snorted. Well, if she wants to continue her adventures with Jaylene, I think she needs to stay in shape. Hey, you didn't live like a monk yourself, my mother remarked sternly, pointing her finger at me. And besides, you left her, not she left you. As long as she remains a wonderful mother to these children, what difference does it make how she spends her nights? Todd, I think you underestimate how difficult it is for her to raise children on her own. Remember, her parents died, and she no longer has any family nearby. Just because she's no longer your wife doesn't mean you have to hate her. Okay, both of you, I muttered and went into the kitchen. Mom followed me with a worried expression on her face. It was obvious that she knew I wouldn't like what she was about to say. This weekend just kept getting better and better. I turned to her, crossed my arms over my chest, and raised my eyebrows expressively. Todd, Jan really wants you to call her. This is important. I rolled my eyes and sighed to keep from lashing out at my mom. This is Aiden you need to talk to, my mother said, gently touching my arm, as if she thought it would calm me down. You really need to discuss something with him, and probably with her. I winced, not wanting to have this conversation, especially when I was tormented by thoughts of unemployment. Then let him call me himself, he has his own phone. I'm not going to call her home number if that's what you want. Her face became serious, almost stern. Todd William Christian, your son is finishing 8th grade. He really wants his dad to be at his graduation. He is simply afraid to ask you about it himself, because he is sure that you will refuse. I shrugged. If she's not there, I'll come, of course. I will write to him about this myself. No, you damn well won't do that, Mom answered sharply. I haven't heard her swear for many years, probably since school. You've made them choose between their parents long enough. Yes, you. Jan, I was always ready to cooperate with you in raising children personally, and I say this with love. Get yourself together and grow up for your son. Yeah, she really screwed up. One and only time in 10 wonderful years. Because of this, you are no longer together, but you are still connected by children, and my father and I will not always be around. What will you do when we can no longer mediate? What do you mean? I grinned. You will both be here until Aiden and Eva leave home. I have cancer. My eyes widened and my mouth fell open. I couldn't say anything. I was waiting for my mom to say, okay, I'm kidding. Considering I was already stressed about losing my job, I didn't need any more bad news. Mom just came and hugged me and I started crying, and she said, it's inoperable. I will undergo chemotherapy to relieve the pain, but the cancer has already attacked my kidneys. I have no more than a year left. I've been waiting for the right moment, but I think now is the time. For now, only your father knows about this, but now that you know, we will tell everyone else. I looked up from my mother's shoulder and saw my father walk into the kitchen and quickly leave. He didn't cry, but his face expressed absolute despair. I couldn't believe they could joke around with each other so calmly, knowing what was going on. This is life, my mother said when she released me, with a serious expression on her face. That's why we're pushing you to focus on what's important, your own children. And also on you taking control of your life again, finding a job you like and starting to live again. She took the home phone and thrust it into my hands. Call and talk to Aiden, and then Jan wants to discuss details. She's willing to do anything to make it more comfortable for you to come except to miss her son's 8th grade graduation. I closed my eyes and looked at the ceiling for a moment, then looked at her and nodded. I looked at my phone, realizing I didn't even know Gianna's new number. Mom smiled, dialed the number, and patted me on the shoulder before leaving. Hello, Mary. Gianna's voice was heard. I froze for a second. It dawned on me that 4 years had passed. It was hard to believe that I hadn't heard that voice for so long. It's me. Can I talk to Aiden? There was no answer, but I heard muffled voices and then my son's teenage voice. Hello, Dad. Hi, buddy, I said, genuinely happy to hear his voice. I heard you had something important that you wanted to tell me about. Um, yes, Aiden answered hesitantly. I don't think it's that important. Aiden, Grandma told me about this before you even called, and I would be happy to be at your graduation. I won't miss this for anything, okay? Okay, thank you, he responded quickly, and I was sure my son was crying. I'm so proud of you, I said and waited, but did not hear an answer. Aiden? Hi, Todd, Dee said Jan, sighing heavily. You can't imagine how happy you made him. Thank you very much for doing this. I know how hard it will be for you, and I really appreciate it. A lot of thoughts were spinning in my head at the same time. I was trying to wrap my head around the fact that my mom had just told me she was dying. Fear of being unemployed for a long time. Realizing that my father was right about the fact that I let myself go, while Jan, as it turned out, still looked amazing. For the sake of my son, I understood that I would have to finally meet my ex-wife face to face. Add to that a hellish headache from a hangover, and my reaction to the voice I once loved so much was far from what it should have been. Well, I'm doing this for his sake, not for your sake, I answered coldly and immediately realized that I had said something completely wrong. Eh? Confused Jano muttered to Jan, and then her angry, offended voice was heard with tears. I know you won't do anything for me, except maybe wish me death. She sobbed loudly. I was about to hang up, but didn't, and just listened to her cry. I didn't know what to say. Despite what everyone thought, I didn't hate her. I was offended. After 4 goddamn years, I still felt the pain of what she did to us. Finally, she calmed down a little and said, I just wanted to express my gratitude that your love for your son was stronger than your hatred for me. Apparently, I was wrong. Todd, I'm sorry, I can't stand it. I'll text you with the details and explain how to organize everything so you can stay away from me. I guess I should at least be happy that after all these years you were finally able to talk to me. Bye, Todd. After hanging up, I was about to open the refrigerator and grab a beer as usual. I started to sweat, but then looked down and saw that my stomach was almost hidden by the belt. I must have gained at least 30 pounds. Instead of beer, I poured myself a glass of water and headed back to my room to look for jobs on the computer. That evening, I was surprised to receive a call from my son's cell phone. Usually, Jan warned my parents if any of the children were going to call me. Hey, buddy, what happened? I asked. Mom hasn't said anything bad about you since you left us, Aiden said, sounding upset. Aiden, listen. No, Dad, listen to this. Mom always honestly said that it was her fault that you separated. And believe me, she still feels terrible about it. Aiden took several deep breaths, and you constantly say bad things about your mother, Gino, although she only says good things about you. Even when her friends speak badly of you, she defends you and fights them back. Don't you understand? You still mean a lot to her, and she hates herself for what she did. Can't you just pretend for one day that you don't hate her? If you can't, I probably don't want you to come to my graduation. I sighed. Aiden was as honest as he was smart and observant. Soon he will have to learn that his last remaining grandmother is dying. I didn't mean to add to that the realization that his parents couldn't be together at his graduation because of their feud. Aiden, I don't hate your mom, and I promise I won't be rude or do anything to ruin your graduation. Cold. Although I might not believe everything my son said, I knew it took a lot of courage for him to tell me all of this. Aiden, thank you for telling me what you just said. Can you please tell your mom that I'm sorry for what I said to her today? Okay, Dad, bye. I didn't call Gina again for 2 months before Aiden's graduation, but we started texting. This didn't happen every day, but every couple of weeks we would have a correspondence of 20 messages or so. It seemed to me that this was much better because you always have the opportunity to reread your words before sending. It was all about Aiden's graduation or something related to children, but it was like the good old days when we discussed children. It became increasingly clear to me how much I had missed in Aiden and Eva's life, seeing them only 2 or 3 months out of the year. It was more than a little depressing. I also began to realize how much Jan I did almost alone. Admittedly, my mom was right. My ex-wife did an amazing job raising the kids. However, as soon as I started to think about what an incredible woman Jan is, which is why I was so happily married to her for so many years, I immediately remembered why we got divorced. As soon as I remembered that scene in the bathroom, all the resentment and some of the anger rolled back again, and I wanted to push any thoughts about it out of my head. Although I now knew about my mother's diagnosis, my parents decided to wait a little before telling their children about it. As long as her condition didn't worsen, the plan was for them to join me for Aiden's graduation and then head back with the kids. When they are with me in the summer, we will tell them that this is probably their last summer with Grandma. Although Mom seemed quite alert most of the time, there were minor signs such as sudden slowness or sleeping more than usual. I'm sure these signs were there before, but I simply didn't notice them, being absorbed in my problems. I was still struggling to find a job. I sent out resumes left and right to every possible place, but never received a single invitation for an interview. Either I did not have experience in the required field, or I was clearly overqualified for these positions. What I had put aside as a deposit from my own place was now going to be used to pay 6 of the remaining 10 child support payments. I hoped it wouldn't come to that. My parents, especially my father, already had too much to worry about me. 4 weeks before graduation, I was still texting Gianna about once every 2 weeks, trying to avoid the topic of our past, no happy times, no breakup. Everything was limited to children or family memories of them, like a trip to Disneyland. One of our long correspondence ended with something strange, which alarmed me a little. Todd, after much thought, I am sending you something that I hope doesn't upset you. My intention is the opposite, but I'm still worried about how you'll take it. No matter how you treat me, I still care about you, and I don't blame you in any way for the way you treated me. I deserved it after what a terrible wife I was. I just want you to know this so you can enjoy the gift. See you. I didn't know what to answer, so I didn't answer. Perhaps I was thinking too much, but what could Dee have sent? Jan thought she was worried it would upset me. I thought about this for several days and went through many options. Maybe this is our wedding album. Her wedding rings. Both of her diamond rings belonged to my grandmother, and I thought several times about asking her to return them. Or maybe this is an invitation to her wedding, which would mean the end of alimony. Fortunately, we didn't have to wait long. 4 days later, my father returned from running errands with a package he had picked up at the post office. It was addressed to me. My parents looked at me as if they already knew what was inside, but weren't sure how I would take it. Both immediately found an excuse to leave the room while I began to open the box. Inside, neatly packed, were 2 thick scrapbooking albums, one for Aiden and one for Eve. I took them to my room in the basement and, leafing through them, I could not hold back my tears. The albums were filled with photographs that meticulously documented the last 4 years of my children's lives. I noticed that Gina was not in the photographs, which, however, was not uncommon. Even in our marriage, she preferred to be on the other side of the camera. Several pictures were of my parents with their children. Recent correspondence with Gina has already shown how much I missed in the lives of my children. Each album captured so many moments that I missed, like Aiden's first date with a girl. I got upset, then angry, then upset again. I couldn't stop thinking it was her fault. She cheated and then fought for full custody of the children. I almost tore one of the albums, but stopped in time. Even though I felt it was her fault for missing these moments, I knew that she had put a lot of effort into collecting and creating these albums for me. I was wondering what to write to Gianna. I didn't want to sound too grateful in case this was her trying to grab me again. On the other hand, I didn't want to look like an ungrateful jerk. As I wrote and erased messages to Gianna, I wondered if she still went to scrapbooking gatherings. Of course, it reminded me again of the last night of our marriage and that bitch Jaylene. Without me, I was sure Jaylene had convinced Gianna to go into full bar party mode like herself. Even though my mom was right it shouldn't be my business, I still cared. Especially because I didn't want my kids to think that this kind of behavior was normal. In the end, I didn't send Jaina any message. It would either be too kind or too cruel, and that's not what either of us needed before Aiden's graduation. A couple of days later, it was time for my scheduled bi-weekly call with Eva. I was surprised when, instead of calling at the appointed time, I received a video call from an unfamiliar number. I answered, and my beautiful 9-year-old daughter appeared on the screen, sometimes looking and acting like she was already 13. With a huge smile that reminded me of my mother, Eva said, "Surprise, Daddy, I now have my own phone. Mom upgraded her phone, so I got her old one. She got rid of her home phone. I had doubts about whether to give a child at that age full access to a pocket computer, but I could not participate in making such decisions. I pushed those thoughts aside and just enjoyed being able to see my youngest child's face as we talked. That's great, honey. I'm glad I can see your smile and your dimples." We talked for a few minutes about school. Eva said that she started dancing in the studio, which Jan already mentioned to me in our correspondence. In the background, I noticed her room and was surprised how much it had changed. Even the color of the walls was different. Eva again made a sly face and asked, "Well, how do you like your belated birthday present?" I thought for a second. My birthday was 3 months ago. Then I realized that Eva meant photo albums. I took a deep breath, smiled, and told the truth. It was hard to see how much I missed out on in your life, living 2 hours away. But I was touched that your mom took so much time to make them for me. You should thank her for me. Definitely, Eva smiled broadly again. But you'd better thank her yourself in person. Dad, she took a really, really long time to do this for you. I remember how much effort your mother put into creating scrapbooks. I hesitated for a second, trying to decide whether I should dig deeper. Eva, does your mother still go to scrapbooking gatherings? Oh yes, she comes at least once a month, said Eve. I think this is her main social life. Oh, you mean when she's not hanging out with Jaylene? My daughter's eyes flashed with anger, and I saw Jaina's face in her eyes. That bitch. Sorry for being rude, Dad, but Mom called her that and said that she would never communicate with her again. I mean, she texted and tried to call, but she just called you names. Mom said Jalen was a pushy bully and the main reason you left us. Dad, if you're trying to find out if Mom goes to bars, she quit. She said she would never touch alcohol again. Her drinking problem is why you left, right? I wasn't trying to blame her, honey. I was just curious. Eve's face lit up with a smile again. I understand. Mom is always interested in you too. She asks Grandma how you are when they talk and wants to know everything when we return home after spending the summer with you. She's surprised you haven't found a girlfriend yet because you're a great man. Is it true? I was taken by surprise by this remark. As I said, sometimes Eva seemed older than her years. And, if you're really curious, Eva lowered her voice and looked at the door, Mom never had a boyfriend either. I overheard her telling her friends that no man was marriageable, so why waste time, and that she had already found her true love, but had just ruined everything. Is it true? I said, and was sincerely surprised that Jan could say that. Don't worry, Dad. Like you, she is happy. As I said, she does a lot of scrapbooking. And sometimes, a couple of times a year, he goes out with some friends, but comes home very late. With a friend? Eve shrugged. We have never seen them, and we don't know whether they are the same person or different ones. I think she just gets lonely sometimes. You probably do this too, right? Honestly, this is too personal, and I guess it's none of my business what Mom does with her male friends, okay? I muttered, feeling uncomfortable about discussing Jaina's and my personal life with our 9-year-old daughter. I just want you to know that Mom may have kissed some man a couple of times, but it's not serious because she still loves you. I think it's because she feels guilty that she sometimes cries. She frowned for a second and then smiled again. Okay, Dad, I'm very glad that you and Mom can communicate again and that we can talk about her. It made us all happier. I'm sure that the fact that she stopped drinking will make everything even easier, right? Bye, Daddy, love you. And I love you, Eva. I couldn't help but chuckle, remembering how she said, I went out to kiss some man, and I was glad that she was thinking about that and not about sex. However, realizing that Eve understood that her mother needed to get needs met showed how smart and perceptive she was. Still, I didn't believe that Jaina had only been on 8 dates since I left, especially since the kids were leaving for me during the summer, but I was glad to hear that she was keeping a low profile. I was even more glad to learn that she broke up with Jaylene, at least until she gave in again. The following week, I began corresponding with Jaina. She became the same again as before. Although neither of us mentioned the scrapbooks, I was sure that Eva had conveyed my message to her ex-wife. This continued until the week of Aiden's graduation. I no longer felt anxious about meeting Jaina. In fact, I missed her. You forget that your spouse is not only your lover, but also your best friend. It was this fun, witty, caring side of Jaina that I connected with in our text messages. With my attempts to find a job still unsuccessful, I really began to think that I had made a huge mistake 4 years ago. Not the decision to divorce Jaina itself. I still believed I did the right thing after the line she crossed. But the decision to quit a job I loved and was successful at, and to move 2 hours away from my kids just to avoid living in the same city, which was already quite a big city with my ex. Those months of correspondence showed me that if I tried, I could probably coexist with Jaina in the same city. I understood perfectly well that if I had stayed to live nearby, Janet would definitely allow me to see my children much more often. In 4 years, 4 long years, I've missed out on so much of their lives, and I'm sure these scrapbooks only scratched the surface of it, and all I got in return was 4 years in a job I hated and now unemployment. My mom had a few bad days before graduation, and I was really worried that she wouldn't be able to go. Dad looked more tired and upset than I had ever seen him before. Some of my problems seemed so small compared to the fact that he would soon lose the love of his life, with whom he had lived for almost 45 years. Luckily, Mum was feeling much better the day before our trip to Cape Town, so our plan to keep everything under wraps until the kids' summer holidays was still in effect. The plan for graduation, as I learned from my mom and Jaina, who discussed it before I even agreed to go, was that my parents and I would arrive the day before the ceremony. We stay at a hotel, and then the next day we all go out to brunch before the event. After the ceremony, we will have a big BBQ, and then the kids will go to the hotel to go on the water slide. The next day, we took them to my parents to spend 2 months with me. The strangest thing was that I was more worried about ending up in the house where I had lived for almost a decade with my family than about meeting Jaina after 4 years. Being in Cape Town for the first time in over 4 years was a surreal feeling. Passing Charles Francis College on the way to the hotel, I felt like I had been slapped in the face. There I was a director, a respected member of the executive management. After many years of working in a position that paid less than those I had previously managed, I was still unemployed with no prospects. We arrived around 8 p.m. and my parents just wanted to go to bed early. Mom's cancer was taking a toll on them, and I knew that portraying health over the next few days would be a lot of stress on her. I was wondering if I should contact some of my old friends who, unfortunately, were that is, Giannis and my friends, so I cut off contact with them. I added this to the list of my other life regrets over the past 4 years. I was sure that most of my old friends or their wives had seen the incriminating photos that I posted on Jaina's social networks. If they were to choose sides, the majority would most likely be on mine. Of course, back then, when everything was still fresh, I didn't think so. They were married to Jaina's friends, and I wanted absolutely nothing to do with anything that had to do with Jaina, so I just disappeared from their lives. I decided not to contact them that night, but made a mental note to try to reconnect this summer through social media. I ended up watching mindless TV shows in my room until 10 o'clock. I then stripped down to my boxers and planned to watch some more mindless TV and go to bed. However, my plan was interrupted by a knock on the door. Since the hotel was almost completely full due to a baseball tournament, my parents were staying in a room on another floor, so I opened the door, expecting it to be my father. But it was Jan who was crying out loud. If I saw her in a crowded room, I might not even recognize her. Her hair was her natural dark brown color and cut to shoulder length, which suited her very well. She had glasses on, which she hardly ever wore when we were married. In leggings and an oversized t-shirt, she looked thinner, especially in the chest area. Her face looked older, but no less attractive, despite the smudged makeup and grimace on her face due to loud crying. I opened my mouth, but didn't have time to say anything. Jan rushed forward and hugged me tightly, causing us both to step back into the room, and the door closed behind us. "Oh God, Todd, I just found out about Mary," Dee sobbed. Jan into my shoulder, pressing his body tightly against me. "I can't believe she's dying." Instinctively, I hugged her. I didn't think about the fact that this was the first time I'd seen her since the night she cheated on me. I thought it was Jan, and she needed a hug because she just found out that my mom is dying. "I'm so terribly sorry, Todd," Dee sobbed, Jan between sobs. "I can't imagine what you and Jonah are going through right now. She has always been like a mother to me. I don't want to lose her too." I didn't say anything. I just held her and tried to hold back my own tears. Now, this seemed like a completely non-sexual moment, and I never in my wildest dreams thought about any kind of romantic interaction with Jaina after what she did. But her warm body pressed against me, her smell, which I always associated with morning hugs. All this reminded me of the past. I began to feel myself getting excited, and I realized that this was absolutely the wrong moment for this. I tried to stop myself, but of course, the more I tried, the worse it got. Jan, she didn't say anything, but it was impossible not to notice. She continued to hug me tightly, resting her head on my shoulder, but shifted her body slightly. I decided that she was just trying to distance herself so as not to feel it. But then she did it again. She raised her head, and our eyes met. "I miss you so much," she whispered. After sex, Jan, she quickly got out of bed, pulled on her t-shirt, and went to the bathroom without saying a word. I was still standing alone, trying to process what had just happened. Judging by the time, it must have been no more than 15 minutes since she came in, but it seemed like much more had passed. Jan, she came out of the bathroom wearing only a shirt and handed me a face towel. "Here, I think you should dry yourself off." "Thank you," I said, taking a towel and heading to the bathroom. While I was washing my face, I heard Jan leave the room without saying a word. After that, I lay in bed, shaking my head, trying to understand what happened and how I felt about it. One thing is for sure, even for such a short act, it was probably the best sex since Jaina and I broke up. I always thought her body was amazing, but now just wow. I was surprised that she still found me attractive despite the extra weight I had gained. Before I fell asleep, I decided that we were both upset, and it just happened, so I shouldn't think too much about it. I woke up and saw that Jan texted me about an hour after she left the room. "Todd, I really hope you don't think I came yesterday to seduce you. But I really needed it, the hug and everything. Thank you. We shouldn't ever mention this again, but I really hope we can talk. Real talk about how it all ended. Mary and Jonah can go to brunch with the kids if you can come to my place. I'll have coffee and pancakes. If you don't want to, I understand. Just let me know when you read this, no matter the time." I sighed and replied, "Fine. At what time?" When I met my parents at the hotel cafe for morning coffee, they were not surprised that they would have breakfast with their grandchildren, and I would go to meet Jaina. I had the feeling that my mother had initially counted on this exact outcome. Before they left to pick up Aiden and Eve, Mom warned me that she had told Jaina the night before about her cancer. I think I should have received an Oscar for how well I acted surprised by this confession. I wasn't going to tell you what happened in my hotel room last night, especially when I didn't know how to feel about it yet. Having given my parents a 20-minute head start, I texted Jaina that I was leaving. Like I said, I was more nervous about going back to my old house than meeting Jaina. So many memories could come flooding back. When I pulled up, I was surprised at how much the appearance of the house and the neighborhood as a whole had not changed since the night I left. I kept reminding myself that this was for the sake of being together and moving forward, not for the sake of getting back into the marriage. I knocked on the door of the house where I had lived for many years. Jan opened it and looked a little annoyed that I was knocking. She was dressed simply but tastefully capri jeans and a white blouse. She had her glasses on again and no makeup. "Damn it, Todd, why are you knocking? This is your home," she said, and quickly went into the kitchen, where, judging by the sounds, she was still cooking something. "According to our divorce agreement, no longer," I replied, half jokingly, half sarcastically. Apparently, my mixed feelings got the better of me. "As if it matters," Dee shouted Jan in response. "I didn't even change the locks. I still consider this our home, even if you don't live here anymore. You can come and go as you please, seriously." I entered the kitchen where Jan finished making pancakes. There was already bacon and fruit on the table. No offense to my mom, but Jan was on a completely different level. I'll add this to the list of things I missed. "I'll eat the burnt one," Dee announced Jan, passing me a plate with a couple of fresh pancakes. "Choose your own toppings and bacon. The coffee is ready." Still drinking black? We sat down to breakfast, chatting about the children almost like we were texting, only now in person. At some point, I noticed that she didn't have bacon on her plate. "Would you like some bacon?" I asked. Crispy bacon was an integral part of our family breakfasts. Jan smiled. "Not for a long time. Now I'm a vegetarian. One of several life changes I made when my life went downhill." "Is it true?" I was surprised, not knowing what happened to her after our separation. "I didn't know you were having difficulties." Jan rolled her eyes and laughed half seriously. "About the same as yours. Todd, the end of our marriage ruined my life. I lost you, and now it seems that we both may lose a parent." "Oh," I said awkwardly. "I think I better start, otherwise we won't make it in time," said Jan, taking a deep breath. "Todd, I know I've said this before, but I'm terribly sorry for what I did that night. Yes, I was drunk, but that's no excuse. I was sober when I agreed to go with Jaylene for a one-night stand. I knew even then that you wouldn't approve of what I was doing, even before I got so drunk that I lost control. I know that my actions hurt you deeply, and I don't blame you at all for the way you reacted for posting those photos, divorcing me, leaving town, and not speaking to me for a long time. I deserve it all." I was silent for a while and then asked, "Was this the only time? When did I sleep with someone else while we were together?" "Yes," answered Jan, "and the only time I lied and sneaked out somewhere with Jaylene. A couple of times the girls and I went to dance after the harvest. That's where I saw Jaylene and got to know her again. We exchanged numbers, but then I just drank a couple of cocktails and danced only with the girls." I nodded, and Jan, the woman I married, rarely lied, and she was bad at lying. Her explanation matched what I had read in the texts. I believed that she only really dated Jaylene once. "But," began Jan, her eyes filled slightly with tears, "this wasn't the first time I flirted. Early in our marriage, when I was still going out with Jaylene, I was about to stop, even before you insisted. One night, when I was really drunk, she encouraged me to flirt with some guy who was buying us shots. We kissed in the corner of the club. When he suggested we go into the car, I realized what I was doing and stopped. My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what she was saying. I didn't know what to say." Jan, she wiped her eyes and shrugged. "I think I wasn't smart enough to learn from that first experience, but I certainly understood everything after the second one. Your departure became a serious lesson for me. I completely stopped drinking and changed a lot about myself to become a better person. I took a break because it was obvious that she was waiting for my reaction. Finally, I said, 'Why did you do this? I mean, I thought I was good enough for you. I know I don't look the same now as I used to, but back when we were married.'" "Todd," Jan interrupted, "you're not to blame for anything, and I think you look as attractive as when we first met. Maybe even better, more mature, with that gray beard. It was I who felt insecure, And then, like a stupid and selfish fool, I decided to regain a piece of my youth. I had no intention of having sex with anyone. I just wanted to have a drink and flirt a little. And then some guy who wasn't even particularly attractive had sex with me in a dirty and smelly toilet. I just wanted it to be over so I could go away and cry somewhere, realizing how much I had screwed everything up. All the sounds you heard were not from pleasure. I mocked myself even more than he did. Even if you never found out, I would still hate myself for it. But knowing that I hurt you made me hate myself even more. I took a deep breath. Thank you for saying that. But this does not explain why you actually took my children and house away from me in the divorce, if you were so remorseful. Jan shook her head. I was so angry that you didn't want to talk to me and that you put my photos out there for everyone to see. You do understand that if this happened now, you would be held accountable. My lawyer said that even with evidence of my infidelity, the court would still support my mother. I agreed to what the lawyer suggested, hoping that you would agree to counseling. If this happened now, do you know that I might have one custody? Jan grinned. Yes, a lot has changed in 4 years, hasn't it? But I wanted the kids to have a home, so most of your child support goes to them. I don't follow the judge's custody schedule and let you take them whenever you want. It's just sometimes difficult. We live in different cities, and they have so many events. But I want them to know you and see you as often as possible. You are an amazing father. You did an amazing job. I never doubted you as a mother, I said. And I really appreciate the albums you made for me. Jan raised an eyebrow. Yes, Eva told me that she told you to thank me personally, she noted, when you were spying on my personal life. I wasn't spying, I said, blushing a little. I was just surprised that you weren't dating anyone. Don't apologize, she replied. I had a wonderful husband, and I haven't met anyone half as good as him, so why try to replace him? Besides, I admit that I myself tried many times to find out how you were doing through the children and through Mary. At the mention of my mother's name, her eyes filled with tears again. I frowned and decided to change the subject. By the way, I haven't said it yet, but I like your new look. The hairstyle, the glasses, it really suits you. What about the muscles from yoga? Or my breasts? Dee asked Jan with a grin, wiping his eyes. I blinked, thinking I had misheard. Okay, now I'm a little offended, she said, pretending to be shocked. Come on, you saw them last night. Haven't you noticed how elastic and smaller they are now? I realized I wasn't wrong last night, but I was in no mood to discuss my ex-wife's breasts. I thought we weren't going to mention last night. Jan frowned slightly. We won't. I was just worried that you might think I spent your money on plastic surgery, but I didn't. A couple of years ago, I started having back pain, she explained, so I went to the doctor, and for medical reasons, my insurance covered breast reduction and lift surgery. You are the first man to see them, now that the scars are completely gone. Really didn't notice? I didn't know what to say. Of course, I noticed that they were smaller, and that she looked even more toned, but I tried my best not to think about it. While I was silently trying to suppress my thoughts, I felt excited, and then I noticed that everything was visible through her blouse and bra. Jan winced. Damn, I hope it didn't bother you that I wasn't perfectly groomed. Todd, I really didn't plan anything, otherwise I would have shaved. Even my armpits had stubble. I almost said that I liked how natural it was, but instead I rubbed my neck. Jan, well, last night everything was unexpected, and I still haven't fully realized it. I told you we wouldn't discuss this, she said with a grimace. Sorry, I'm just really glad that we can sit and talk like this. I missed you very much. I missed you too, I replied. I'm glad we could discuss this, but I guess it's time to go. I stood up, hoping my arousal wouldn't show through my jeans. Jan also stood up and nodded. Todd, I really hope we can continue to have these conversations. This summer will be very difficult for the children, especially Eva when Mary tells them about her illness. I want to do everything to help them and you. I still love you and care about you. It won't be easy for me either. She started crying again. We may never have sex again, but I hope we can at least cuddle." I nodded, and she came over to hug me. I don't think she meant it right now, but I returned her hug anyway. This time my jeans helped hide my excitement, and when we released each other, we simply exchanged polite nods of goodbye. I returned to my hotel room to change into business casual attire for the ceremony, reflecting on the past 24 hours. While I can't say that this conversation with Gianna was pleasant, it wasn't nearly as bad as I had imagined. The details of her previous affair, when Aiden was very young, came as a surprise more because she admitted it. This incident was exactly why I put an end to her outings with Jaylene. I didn't know if she confessed everything to earn my trust, or if she just didn't see the point in hiding anything anymore. One way or another, it seemed that Jan doesn't want to hurt me anymore. On the contrary, it was as if she was trying to read my thoughts and justify what I did when I left. The graduation ceremony was short, but very emotional for all of us. Jan and I sat on the edges of the row, with Eva between my parents. My mother sat next to Gianna and held her hand almost the entire time. I knew that when we were married, Jan and Mom were very close. Only now I realized that their relationship remained the same no matter what. Even after Mom saw those terrible photos of Gianna and her lover. Jan was in a beautiful short dress and heels that emphasized her already toned legs. The makeup was done to perfection, and I found myself staring at her several times. None of my affairs could compare to her. I once regularly had sex with this beauty, I thought, sneaking a glance at her slender calves. I expected the family barbecue after the ceremony to be an intimate affair. However, several of Aiden's friends, including his first girlfriend Claire, came with their families. In total, about 50 people gathered in my old house, and Jan, like a real hostess, rushed back and forth, receiving guests. Eva, of course, helped her. My mom offered to help, but she looked at her and insisted that she just relax and enjoy the holiday. To prove to myself that I was not a complete egoist after all, I also decided to get involved. I helped replenish supplies of snacks and drinks and cleaned up the trash. When I noticed that the punch was running out, I looked in the refrigerator in the kitchen, but there was no soda there. Deciding that it was most likely in the refrigerator in the basement, I headed there. Downstairs, in the basement where my office used to be, I found Gianna. She was already holding a bottle of soda in her hands. "Oh, I was just coming for this," I said. "Yes, I'm not completely helpless," Jan responded, and then narrowed her eyes and shook her head. "Sorry, Todd. It didn't sound the way I wanted. I shouldn't have relied so much on your help. You are a guest." I raised my eyebrows. "What about, this is always your home?" "Damn, you can be incredibly annoying sometimes," she said with a laugh. "Thank you. I really appreciate your help. And for you to come here and talk to me. I can't tell you how much it means to Aiden, Eve, and, frankly, myself." Her eyes filled with tears again, and she suddenly began to jabber. "After all the terrible people I've been, I don't deserve anything from you. I broke your heart so much that you couldn't even be in the same city as me. I saw those photos you took. I still can't believe you were able to touch me last night after what you saw. I had so much to fix, and I didn't know where to start. Selfishly, I was glad you moved because if I saw you by accident, it would have hurt so much that I would have wanted to die." She burst into tears, and I, following my usual impulse, hugged Gianna for the third time in the last 24 hours. Apparently, she needed it. "Tell me what to do," she begged. "Tell me how I can fix everything I've done to you. I will do everything to make you feel better. I hate that you live away from your children, that you are unhappy because of me. I want you to stop suffering, find someone beautiful, get married, and be happy. What should I do for this? Tell." "Hush," I said softly, continuing to hug her. "Jan, it's not your responsibility to make me happy. Not now. You've already apologized and become a wonderful mother. Just keep being like this." "Oh God, Mary is dying," she muttered, crying even harder. "You will lose your mother. I'll lose her too. I don't want this. I ruined everything." I held her until she calmed down. She looked just as disheveled as she did last night when she came to my room. Handing me a bottle of soda, she said quietly. Can you please take this upstairs and make some more punches? I'll go and get myself in order. You know, I didn't deserve a man like that you. Is it true? I always knew this. I am sure that you will find someone who will be worthy of you and will make you happier than I could. I watched her run away and went back to the party to get more punch. I talked to other parents, including the parents of my son's girlfriend. Everyone seemed to know that I was Gianna's ex-husband, but no one really cared. 20 minutes later, Jan returned, once again acting as hostess, with her makeup done to a high standard. This time I decided to stay away from her for her sake, not for my own. The party was ending, and we were getting ready to head back to the hotel, apparently just with Eve, since Aiden wanted to be with Claire before he left town for the rest of the summer. I saw my mother walking up the stairs to the bathroom and noticed that she was having a hard time holding back the pain. Fearing that she would fall, I rushed to her aid. I'm fine, Todd, she protested, but she allowed me to help. Don't overdo it, Mom, I said quietly. Everything will be fine. Let me enjoy the time I have left, she replied, then touched my cheek. I see that you and Jan are no longer trying to kill each other. This is a good sign. So you signed a peace treaty? I didn't think we had a war, I chuckled, trying not to think about her dying. We talk to each other and can be in the same room. That's good, she smiled and was about to go into the bathroom. Mother? I called before she closed the door. How close are you and Gianna? Mom shrugged. Ever since you got married, she has become like a daughter to me. You don't abandon your child, even if he makes a huge mistake. I needed some time to recover from those horrible photos you should never have posted. Now we probably talk 2 to 3 times a week. She comes to see me several times a year. I think close enough to know that it will be just as hard for her as it is for you. That's why I didn't want you to stop talking. You were always much better together than apart. I think that remains true, even if not as a couple, but as parents and hopefully friends. I left her and sat alone for a few minutes while I waited for Eva to be ready to leave. Jan helped her get ready and may not see her daughter for several months unless there is a funeral. I was surprised that my mother was so close to Gianna, and I knew nothing about it even from the children. Now it became clear why Jan said I was unhappy. My mother probably told her about it. Honestly, she was right. While I was more than happy to be actively co-parenting with Gianna again, I couldn't imagine being her friend. I was surprised that she said she wanted me to find someone and be happy. Even though I wanted the best for her, I didn't want to see her in a serious relationship with another man. Although just a couple of months ago, I couldn't even imagine myself in the same room with her. I was beginning to think that I needed to be more open when my father announced that we were ready to leave. I was sorry to disappoint my daughter, but I was really not in the mood to go on the water slides that night, so I let her go with her father while my mother watched them. I had too many thoughts running through my head, and I needed some space to think it all through. First of all, I slept with Gianna again, and it was incredible. It was hard not to think about doing it again, even though I still hadn't seen us together. I wasn't clairvoyant to know that Jan would like to come back to me in a second if I asked. She just didn't think she had a chance. Last night had been spontaneous, whereas a second time in bed with her would probably have raised Gianna's hopes, and I didn't want that. Besides, I still lived 2 hours away. I seriously began to question this decision. Why do I live so far from my children in a small town with no career prospects? Yes, the idea was to avoid Gianna, but if that is no longer necessary, then my move is no longer justified. I was seriously thinking about going back to Kipid after my mother left when I heard a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough it was Jan. This time she looked more angry than upset. I closed my eyes and shook my head, thinking, "What is it this time?" before opening the door. "Jan, what a pleasant surprise," I tried to say without sarcasm. She walked past me and sat down on a chair. Her arms were crossed, and she was clearly unhappy. "Even when we were married, I was terrible at guessing why you were angry with me," I said calmly. "I'm not mad at you," snorted Jan, and then shook her head irritably. "Damn, Todd, Why didn't you tell me right away that you were unemployed? Because it's my problem, I said, not wanting to be lectured by the woman who cheated on me. I have paid my obligations and will continue to do so. You have nothing to worry about. Todd, I make enough to cover all expenses until you find a job, Dee said Jan. The house has already been paid off, so it won't be a problem for me if you stop your payments in advance. Only a few months left. I think the courts would not approve of this. I've heard horror stories about missed child support payments. We could figure it out together. Damn, Todd, do you really think I want you to empty your savings? Jan, she clasped her hands in a gesture of despair. Can't you see how much I still care about you? It hurts me to see you being so stubborn and not allowing me to help. Really, how could you help? I shrugged. Jan put her hand on her hip. Maybe we should stop living in another city. If you could stand living within 50 miles of me, I might call Colette. Who is this? From Scrapbooking, Donna's wife. I looked at the ceiling and sighed. I worked with Don at university. He was a dean with whom I worked closely as director of communications. I didn't even know his wife was one of Gina's scrapbooking friends. Don was one of the people I ignored when I moved in with my parents. I'm sure the college wasn't happy when I gave 2 weeks' notice to coincide with the start of my vacation. Colette says Don sometimes asks about you, Dee continued Jan. He thought you would become a top manager at some company, considering how well you did in college. Mary never really said anything, just mentioned that you hated your job, so I didn't bother asking questions. I wouldn't have said anything even if I had known I understood that you wanted privacy. Yeah, how about I just dropped everything and left them in a difficult situation by publicly announcing that I was a cuckold, I blurted out. I don't think Don has much respect for me now after this. Is that why you cut everyone out of your life, all your friends, our mutual friends? Jan covered her face with her hands. I was worried that she would start laughing. I would definitely lose my temper if that happened. My face tensed, and I said coldly, mainly because of what you said yourself. Seeing you or anything that reminded you of you was too painful. Yes, I regret posting those photos. I didn't want to face people knowing that they were judging me because I couldn't make you happy and you cheated on me with a man like that. Gina's hands dropped, and I noticed she was crying again. This has happened so many times in recent days that I've lost count. Well, here we go again. Do you think those photos made you look bad? Dee asked John sharply while tears streamed down her face. Why do you think I changed my appearance? They're probably still on the internet somewhere, and I hope I look different enough now that people don't recognize me. As it is, half the city knows what an idiot I was for sleeping with a random man in the toilet when I had a perfect husband at home. People didn't stop respecting you after those photos, they stopped respecting me. She sighed, brushed away her tears, and continued. It took 2 years for Colette to start talking to me again. Deborah never forgave me, like almost all of our old friends. They would take your side if you kept in touch with them. Deborah was the wife of Mike, with whom I worked in the communications department. It was he who got Gina interested in scrapbooking. I already said that I was angry, but I forgave you a long time ago for what you did, especially considering that my actions compared to yours are simply a disaster. But I'm still afraid that those photos might come out. What if our children's friends see them? What if Aiden sees them? Damn, I'm sure he's already looking at adult sites. Jan, she wiped her eyes and raised her hand in surrender. Sorry, I almost forgot what I wanted to say. Todd, please don't be a martyr. I want you to be happy and successful, even if there is nothing more between us. Please let me help if I can. So what if you call Colette? It's unlikely that Dawn has connections where I live now. Our alma mater closed long ago. This is no longer a university town. Would you really mind if I came back here if you and I weren't together? Yes, I was already seriously considering returning, regardless of her opinion, but her interference irritated me. I didn't like it when my parents taught me and looked after me, and I especially didn't want to tolerate it from my ex-wife. Of course, I won't mind, she answered calmly. I never wanted you to leave. I never wanted a divorce. Yes, I said then that I was glad you left, but I would rather go through a little pain so that I could see the wonderful father of my children, so as not to be alone for 2 months every year. If you stayed in the city, I would tell my lawyer to seek joint custody, and most likely, I would rent an apartment, and you could buy the house. Don't complain about these 2 months alone, I chuckled. I know what your temperament is. Yes, Eva told me that you hardly date when the kids are around, but I'm sure you're enjoying your single life these 2 months. Jan looked at me as if I had just hit her. You still think I'm some kind of slut because of that night, right? She asked with offense. No, I rubbed the back of my head, feeling awkward. I'm just saying that when kids are around, you probably don't want to get your needs met. I have the same thing. I completely abstain while they are with me. Okay, you haven't found the one yet, but I'm sure you're allowing yourself to relax while they're away. I'm not judging honestly, I do the same thing, I just think you're better at it. Jan raised both hands, showing 8 fingers. 8. That's how many times I've had sex since our divorce, including last night with you. 3 of them were with the same man, and everyone except you used condoms. She took a deep breath and continued. And by the way, I'm completely broken every time the kids leave. That's probably why I'm so emotional right now. The first time they left, an ex-friend talked me into sex with a recently divorced woman. This is the one I've been with 3 times. But the sex was so disappointing that I didn't even let him stay the night, and after that I just hated myself even more. I almost broke down. I was ready to start drinking again, although before that I had been sober for 6 months. I called your mom and was surprised that not only did she not hate me after those photos, but she also said that she still loved me like a daughter and was worried about me. So on those days when I was alone, I tried to distract myself by making scrapbooks about the children's lives for those books that I didn't even know if you even wanted. I also met up with some scrapbooking friends, the ones who didn't turn on me for being a walking bitch, and talked to Mary a lot. Sometimes you took a vacation and went where your mother and I could spend time while you were busy with the children. That's how incredible your mom is. The precious time she could spend with her grandchildren is spent listening to me while I complain about my unhappy and lonely life. Soon I won't even have that when they leave. She finished speaking and started crying again. But this time I didn't go over to hug her. It didn't feel right. I just took a deep breath and said calmly, okay, tell Colette that I'm looking for a job and am willing to move back if the salary is right. But I don't want to start before the end of summer. I wanted my mom to enjoy this time with Aiden and Eva. Jan, she smiled slightly, wiped her eyes, and took out her phone. I didn't expect her to contact Colette right away. I went to the bathroom to get a tissue because her makeup had smeared again. When I returned Jan, I was reading something on my phone. Don says no problem, she read, but he suggests we start remotely until you can work in the office. Weekly video meetings with the team and with him are expected. What? I laughed. Don was the dean. He had connections, of course, but he couldn't hire people. This is for your previous position, Director of Communications. He's unhappy with Jeff. Jeff Richards? They took him instead of me. Jeff worked under me, but he acted like he knew everything. Yes, since this is an outside position, Don has no problem convincing the board to fire Jeff and hire you back. The council has generally agreed with his decisions since he became president. Wait, Don is now the president of the college? I was surprised. Jan nodded. For about a year now. I thought you knew. Do you want to think it over or tell Colette that you agree? Can you give me his number? I don't think I have it on my new phone. I'd like to talk to him in person. Jan looked disappointed, but nodded. She took a pen and pad from the table and wrote down the number. Jan, wait, I said when she was about to leave. She stopped, putting her hand on the door handle, and turned around. Thank you. And if you have free time this summer, you don't have to hide from me. It will be very difficult for the children to learn about their mother, and I am sure that the more time you can spend with her and the children, the better. I sighed. And I need your support too. It's really hard for me to accept that I'm losing her. Do you want me to stay the night? Jan said quietly. Aiden is spending time with Claire and her parents, and he'll be fine tonight. This doesn't mean we're getting back together, I said, feeling bad because I knew this would probably hurt her. I know, but I would like to have sex with you again and then fall asleep cuddling. Jan removed her hand from the door and turned to face me. We probably shouldn't do this, but I'd like it too. That's exactly what we did. I also noticed 3 tattoos that she had never had before. 1 on the inside of the arm and 2 on the thigh. The ones on her hip were the astrological signs and birthstones for both of our children. The one on her hand, the writing I couldn't read. Even though our meetings after the divorce were short, they turned out to be so intense and better than any of my casual relationships. Jan looked at me as if she found me just as attractive as the first time all those years ago. If it was just sex, I would want to continue what we did the last 2 nights. However, the feeling of Gianna's naked body pressed comfortably against mine reminded me of the intimacy of people who are in love. What made things difficult for me was that even with all her tears, Jan acted exactly like the sweet, caring, compassionate woman I fell in love with and was happily married to for almost 10 years. In fact, it seemed to me that she was still the same woman until the moment I saw that damn message on the MacBook. Only for a few hours she acted like another person with whom I could not remain married. She made no excuses, and when I gave her a chance, she admitted everything, apologizing as sincerely as she could. She was literally torn inside from the fact that she had hurt me, just as Jan, whom I married, would have felt. I was never the man who could accept his wife's infidelity, but did that mean I had to be the one who would never forgive her? I know it's still early, but do you mind if we just turn off the lights and go to bed? Jan whispered, pressing herself to my chest. We can continue in the morning, and then I want to shower and go home before Aiden wakes up. I need to make sure he has everything packed and say goodbye to him. Of course, it was a long day. I would be asleep by now, I replied and reached over to turn off the light. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. I checked and saw that Jan had left a note. I took it and read. Todd, I'm sorry I left while you were sleeping, but I think it's best for both of us. Last night, being in bed with you seemed too natural. I thought I could just have sex with a man who turns me on like no one else, but I can't. I still love you, and I can't be happy if it's only sex. I want everything. Everything I've lost. I sincerely hope that we can continue to get along and the invitation this summer still stands. But I can't have sex with you again unless it's part of a romantic relationship. I hope you understand and will keep the last 2 nights just between us. With love, Jen. P.S. Call Dawn about that job. As planned, the next morning my parents and kids drove home in their car while I drove alone in my truck. There were many tears as they said goodbye to Gianna. We didn't even hug. I shook her hand, and it was awkward. Although I wanted my mother to spend as much time as possible with her grandchildren, I wished that no one had gone with me or that we had not agreed to switch halfway through. Too much time to be alone with thoughts, most of which were about Gianna. Even though her letter said otherwise, I was confident that she would agree to have sex with me again. Part of me wanted it, just so I could have sex again with a woman I find incredibly sexy. However, I knew that I still cared deeply for the woman I was once married to. 4 years later, it seemed that the woman who cheated on me had disappeared. Perhaps she only existed for those few hours in the bar. It seemed too good to be true that I had the opportunity to return to my old job, see my kids, and reconnect, even if it was platonic with my former best friend. The same friend I couldn't stop thinking about. I was half an hour away from my parents' house when I received a call from an unknown number. I answered using speakerphone mode. Hello? Todd, damn, it's been so long, you bastard, said a familiar voice. I laughed. Don, it's really a long time ago. This is Dr. Don Rabble, president of Charles Francis College, and don't forget it. Don't talk nonsense, you hate being called a doctor. Don laughed. True, but I need to keep my staff in line. Tell me, will you accept this job? It even comes with a professional development package to get you started on your master's program. With some letters after your name, You could one day become Dean Todd. Honestly, our online department has been terrible since you left. You were always one step ahead, introducing new ideas. We need this now more than ever. I was thrilled when Colette told me you were back in town. I was already thinking about hiring a headhunter to find you and offer you a job. So just name your price within reason. We will beat everything you earn now. All that I earn now? Yes, Jan told Colette that you are doing well, but you are considering changes. Waiting 2 months for you to start work is not enough time to prepare for the new school year, but if you can start remotely in a month, I will send a contract. I thought Jan was begging my ex-coworker to give me my job back because I couldn't find a job. Now I was glad I hadn't said anything too harsh to her, and not just because it led to sex. Jan saved my pride in this case. Don wasn't doing me a favor, he really wanted me back. Well, how about 15% on top of my old salary? I said in a businesslike tone. Perhaps you will need an updated resume. Don laughed. After so many years of working with us, I think we have the old one in the archives. I just need your new email. Check out our terrible website and contact HR. I'll tell Deborah to prepare the contract and wait for your call. I'll do it. It was good to hear from you again, Don. Me too, Todd. Listen. He took a deep breath. It was a really nasty situation you went through. I didn't see the photo, but I heard it. I'm sorry you didn't let us support you. Us men need to stick together. And I'm glad you're talking to Gina again. She and Colette became very close last year, and I can tell that she is no longer the same woman who cheated on you. She doesn't drink at all and devotes all her time to her children. Believe me, Colette is the last person who would approve of something like hers. Just wanted to let you know that I'm glad to have you back on the team, as my employee. We both laughed, and I noticed that I was getting closer to my parents' house. They were already there with Aiden and Eve. Listen, before I go, Dawn, I have to say that this isn't about notice. My mother has terminal cancer. Damn, Todd. She won't last until the end of the summer. So I don't want to move until September, or at least until, well, you know. No problem. I trust you to work remotely until you can return to the office. And don't wait until you get back to call me about personal matters. I really want to know how you lived these years. I'm surprised you're still single. Agreed, Dawn. Bye. I pulled up and Eva ran out to give me a big hug, like we hadn't seen each other in forever. I wasn't going to complain. The father came over and said that they were going to go pick up some things, leaving the children with me. I offered to go with them so my mother could stay home and rest, but she was already getting into the car. I knew it was useless to argue with her, so I simply went into the house. I started talking to Aiden and Eva about what they wanted to do in the summer. Eve had a lot of ideas, mostly unrealistic, and Aiden said almost nothing. He was probably in his dark teenage moods, but perhaps also upset that he would have to be separated from his girlfriend of only 3 months for the entire summer. As usual, I tried to get details from them about how their year went, although the album with photographs already told me a lot. After a half-hour conversation, I went down to the basement and called the college's human resources department. Don wasn't kidding when he said everything was settled. The call only took 5 minutes. They updated my personal and banking information and said a job offer would be emailed to me within the hour. At that moment, I thought that I really had a chance to improve my life. I tried to consider these 4 years as freedom. I walked, drank, entered into casual relationships when I wanted. But my father was right when he said that I was just wasting my time by not living life to the fullest. I thought it would make my mom feel better if she knew I had my job back and could now be a much bigger part of my children's lives. The landline rang, and I thought it was Jan calling to see how things were going. "Hello," I said in an almost playful tone. I was in such a good mood at that moment. "Hello, is this Todd Christian?" A rough male voice rang out. "Yes, who is it?" "My name is Officer Livingston, Mr. Christian." There has been an accident. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. I remember all the details. They are forever imprinted in my memory, but the order of events was like a kaleidoscope. Everything happened at once. The best way to describe it is that on the way home from the store, my father had a heart attack and crashed into a house at 40 miles an hour. There were people in the house, but fortunately, they were not in the room where the car drove into. The father died before help arrived, either due to a heart attack or an accident. Mom died from her injuries in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Her body was severely weakened by cancer. I could not begin funeral arrangements until the autopsies were completed, which could take up to a week. I sat in the hospital waiting room, numb after talking to the police. I just left Aiden and Eve at my parents' house without saying a word. They didn't know anything, and I couldn't look them in the eye. 4 years ago, I thought I was acting like a man when I posted those photos to humiliate Gianna and then walked away and left the kids. At that moment, I believed that a man should not cry, especially in front of his children. I had never seen my father cry, and I didn't want Aiden and Eve to see my tears. I took out my phone and sent a message to Gianna. Mom and Dad died. Car accident. Please pick up the children immediately and take them home. They don't belong here. Immediately after that, for the second time in my life, I blocked Gianna's number and also did a mass block on all the contacts I didn't want to deal with. I needed time to be alone. I didn't want to communicate with anyone. I left the hospital and did what I thought I could do best after my divorce. I went to a bar to get some beer and started flirting with a woman I probably wouldn't have noticed if I was sober. Even though she probably told me her name twice, I still didn't remember it. She flaunted her plunging cleavage, and that was what I was looking at. We talked and joked, and I knew that she would leave with me if I asked. But I still wanted to drink a little more. "Todd, what the hell are you doing?" A familiar voice rang out. I turned and saw Gianna. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. "You are married? You scum," the woman exclaimed, looking at me with disgust, and then stood up. "Divorced," I shouted after her, but I wasn't too upset that she left. Jan approached me with a serious look, the same one that I remembered from her raising children, and not in relation to me. "Todd, listen to me. I know you're hurting, we're all hurting, but drinking alone won't help." "I wasn't alone until you came," I muttered. Gianna's lips tightened, but she held back. "Todd, please, let's go. I'll take you home. We'll sort this out in the morning. I can help you. I've done a lot of things in my life that I'm not proud of, but the next few minutes were some of the worst. I was drunk, and Gianna's appearance at that moment pushed me into the angry phase of my grief. I was so depressed that I wanted to hurt her again. "Fuck you," I blurted out. "If you hadn't slept with guys 10 years younger than you in toilets, they would still be alive." She didn't answer. Jan just looked at me as if I had hit her. "And after 2 miserable nights with you, I was about to finally have real pleasure with a woman, and you ruined everything. Yes, I believe that in 4 years you only had 6 times. You clearly lost all the experience." Again, she didn't say anything, just burst into tears and slowly turned around. Adding fuel to the fire, I shouted after her. "Yes, get the hell out of here and take the kids home. I wrote it to you, or you don't know how to read." As soon as Jan left the bar, I realized what I had just told her. Nothing she did 4 years ago gave me the right to treat her like that, especially in a crowded bar in our hometown with people who knew us. Especially considering that Mary has been a mother to her for the past 15 years as much as she has been to me. I behaved like a complete bastard. I'm not that kind of person, but I was completely overwhelmed by the emotions of the sudden loss of my parents. But looking back, I don't think that was enough of an excuse. Too late, I got up and headed for the exit, but she was already gone. Feeling terrible, I took out my phone, unblocked Gianna's number, and sent her a message. "Jan, I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything I said." There was no answer. I called a taxi and drove home to an empty house. Jan and the children left. The funeral was small, about 20 of my parents' friends and a couple of relatives I barely knew. They were cremated and buried together in the same urn. I couldn't give a speech. I felt too overwhelmed. Out of the corner of my eye, I was sure I saw Gianna and Aiden sitting at the very end. Part of me wanted to apologize for the terrible things I said. But knowing that Jan came because she was also grieving, I decided to wait until the end of the service. She was not at the wake, which for me was an hour of torture. Neither Jane nor my children responded to my messages or calls. I was in a room full of people, but I had never felt so alone. When I returned to my parents' house, I felt terrible, almost hating myself for my words, because of which Jan and my children avoided me. I wondered if Jan felt the same way after her cheating ruined our marriage. She did say that knowing that she hurt me was the worst part of her experience. Instead of having a self-pity party laced with self-hate, I took on the difficult task of packing all of my parents' belongings. I already knew that everything would either be sold or donated to charity. One of the first things I found were albums of photographs of my mother. I started flipping through old photographs from my childhood, and tears flowed from my eyes. I came across photos from when Jan and I first started dating. I was so used to the fact that my ex-wife was always behind the scenes that I forgot. My parents also had many photographs of Jana from the good times of our marriage. While looking at these photos, I came up with an idea. I started pulling out every photo of Jan with my parents from the albums, whether I was in them or not. I didn't have the patience or talent to replicate what Jan did with the albums she sent me. Instead, I went to the store and bought the most beautiful photo album I could find. I've arranged all the pictures of Jana with my parents in chronological order as best I can. 3 times I tried to write a letter of apology, but I was too overwhelmed to express my guilt in words. I ended up just sending the album to Jana without a note, hoping that she would understand that it was my attempt to apologize. A few days later, I met with a lawyer about the will. Luckily, my parents' life insurance covered all hospital and funeral expenses. I was left with the house and all my property except my mother's jewelry. Her wedding and engagement rings were for her children, and the rest were given to Jana. From a financial perspective, they had about $10,000 in investments, which was also left to my children. Immediately after that meeting, I met with a realtor to discuss plans to sell the house. I was packing up my belongings to move back to Cape Town, and the estate agent was hiring an auction firm to appraise and sell everything of value, with the rest going to be donated. The house was to be put up for sale at a reduced price, with the hope that the proceeds would be enough to buy a medium-sized condominium in Cape Town. A week later, I was already renting a small apartment and was waiting until all the property was sold to understand my budget for a new home. The lawyer sent the inheritance to Jana and the children. It had been 3 weeks since I last spoke to either of them, and I realized that I had probably crossed a line that Jan would not be able to forgive. I had 2 days to settle in, and then I started working in my old position. The office looked the same as before, but the staff had completely changed. No one from my previous team remained after my successor took my place. The 3 employees who now worked under my direction were young women, about 25 years old, and quite attractive, although 2 of them were married. Knowing Jeff, who was once warned for inappropriate behavior with female employees, I wouldn't be surprised if he hired them based on their appearance. However, I was pleased that all but one did an excellent job. I hope that Marcy, the only single woman with the Barbie doll look of her natural blonde hair and blue eyes, could learn the skills she needed. She was very nice and hardworking, but was unsure of the software we were using. Apparently, Jeff used her solely as an assistant and gave her almost no tasks during the 2 months of work under his leadership. By reviewing the university website and promotional materials in advance, I came up with a clear plan of what needed to be fixed. Having quickly understood the situation, I kept all 3 women busy working on their ideas. At the end of the first day of work, I felt like myself for the first time in many years until I returned to an empty apartment. Dawn called to check on me and even invited me for a few drinks. I lied when I said I still needed to get settled. After the last conversation with Jayana, I decided to slow down with drinking. I ended up working on the site until 10 in the evening and then got ready to go to bed. I looked at my phone, debating whether to text Jayana or the kids, but decided not to. It's been 2 weeks since my last unsuccessful contact with them. The next morning, I arrived at work to find a plate of freshly baked banana muffins on my desk. I asked the girls who brought them, but they all said it wasn't them. Deborah, who arrived first, said they were already there when she arrived. Throughout the week, I found different types of baked goods on my table. I thought it might be one of my old colleagues or one of the girls who didn't want to draw attention to herself. But on Friday morning, I discovered lemon cranberry cookies sprinkled with purple crumbs. Then I realized how stupid it was not to guess earlier. It was Jan. Her signature recipe gave her away. I hope this was her way of thanking me for the photo album. However, I was now sure that I wanted more than just an apology. I wanted to renew what had begun to brew between us before my grief and anger destroyed everything. I told the girls that I knew who our mystery baker was, and no, it wasn't a secret admirer like Marcy and Erin thought. This time I wrote a short letter and left it on the table in an envelope with Gianna's initials on it. In it, I expressed all my feelings about our last meeting and expressed my desire to apologize and improve my relationship with the children. There were several offers on my parents' house, and I already knew roughly my budget for a new home. I spent most of the weekend looking at various condos and townhomes that were within the price range. I also bought a gym membership, deciding it was time to get rid of the 30 extra pounds I had gained since my divorce. I looked at my phone several times, wondering if I should contact my estranged family, but decided to wait until Jan received my letter. I was hoping my baking fairy would return on Monday. On Monday, I was surprised to find nothing baked on the table, but noticed that there was no envelope either. I inspected the table to make sure the cleaners hadn't removed it. I wasn't sure whether Jan had read the letter or not. I was so distracted that morning that all three girls took turns making fun of me, especially Marcy, who seemed a little attracted to me. I continued to look at the phone, wondering if I should call Gianna. I didn't try to contact her on the day of my parents' funeral. At one point, just before dinner, Deborah, the eldest of the three, who had been married for 6 years, asked, "Who is to blame for your divorce?" I think it was her. The other two girls looked at me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to discuss this with my employees after being their manager for less than 2 weeks. To get a divorce, yes, it was her, I said. But I also screwed up, which is why we stopped communicating, even when we started to find a common language again. Did you mess up as badly as she did? I made a "I don't know" gesture. Not really, but I think I hurt her almost as much as she hurt me. Does this make sense? Deborah frowned, as she always did when contemplating a solution to a problem. Perhaps she didn't talk to you because she's afraid you'll hurt her again. If she leaves you gifts, I think she has already forgiven you. It sounds like she wants your forgiveness or is trying to win you over, or both. And the fact that it's food shows that she's really trying. And what do you propose? Take her to lunch at Reveal's Deli. She'll be there at 12:15, Deborah said with a smile. What? I was stunned and looked at Marcy and Erin, who were covering their mouths, trying not to laugh. On the second day, when we had the mystery baker, I came a little early to find out who it was, Deborah said, smiling. Sorry, but secrets irritate me. I met your lovely ex-wife, and we've chatted a little every morning since. Yes, she got your letter and your casserole is in the fridge. She left something for you for dinner instead of bringing something to share with us. I should have told you right away, I'm sorry. I guess I just wanted to see how much you wanted to reconnect with her, which is clearly a lot. I frowned slightly, a little upset that one of my coworkers would play such a joke on me after only meeting me for a couple of weeks. Did you see how she read the letter? Deborah shook her head. No, but I'm pretty sure your apology was sincere. Todd, I seriously think she's already forgiven you. She understands that you said this because you were in a terrible state after the sudden death of your parents. Honestly, I wish you had told us about this. It's obvious you're still grieving. Jan is afraid that you will never truly forgive her for ruining your marriage and doesn't want to be hurt again after already getting her hopes up. However, she was really touched by the gift you sent her and decided to take a chance. I hope that we will get back together, right? I sighed. After our 2 evenings together and an invitation to visit her, how could I not give her hope and then destroy everything by saying the real. Exactly. Anyway, Jan feels like she's given you enough time to get over your loss and wants to meet to discuss how you'll take care of the kids now that you're back in town, Deborah said. But if you really think that something could start between you again, I would make a move. I think that's the reason you're so distracted. I looked at the three girls who were smiling at me. Deborah played me like a newbie, but it was clear that her intentions were good, and I had to admit that she was right. I did think about starting something again with Jaina. Deborah, if you ever do anything like that again, I'm warning you, I said sternly. No offense, sir, Deborah began, crossing her arms, but I think we all agreed that we like you a lot better than our last boss. I think helping you and Jaina is a way to ensure that you stay here for a long time, so I selfishly helped myself too. And maybe I'll do it again. I only think about myself. At this, the other two girls burst into laughter, and Deborah winked with a mischievous smile. We can make it through the rest of the day, boss, if you need to take a long lunch. I couldn't help but smile back. I'll let you know, but don't be lazy, I said. I expect you to be working on projects by 1 o'clock. See you, ladies. Reveal's Deli was a few blocks from campus, not far from the building where Jan worked when we were married. 2 or 3 times a week, we tried to meet there for lunch. After going there regularly for years, the staff knew us by name, and we even called the place our place. The last time I ate there was 2 days before I caught Jaina with that man in the restroom. I walked inside and saw one of the waitresses I knew from before standing at the entrance. She looked older and a little plumper just like me. Another reminder of how long ago I left this city. Mr. Christian. Wow, how many years have passed, she exclaimed joyfully with a wide smile. You look as good as always. Mrs. Christian is sitting over there in the corner. She asked to sit you in a booth for more privacy. She has already ordered for you, but if you need anything else, just tell me. I walked to the table and saw Jaina. She looked amazing as always, but a little nervous. She was still wearing her glasses and was wearing an elegant business suit with a fitted skirt, stockings, and heels. I caught a glimpse of the beautiful outline of her crossed legs before I smiled at her and sat down. We nodded to each other as a greeting and began to eat lunch. Jan ate some kind of meatloaf and ordered my favorite pastrami sandwich. She called you Mrs. Christian. It seems she doesn't know. I began to diffuse the situation. If I heard correctly, she called me Miss Christian. Della is aware, Jan answered softly. When I was able to start eating here again without feeling too emotional about us, she asked how you were doing. I don't think we ever discussed this, but did you leave my last name? Yes, she answered with a slight shrug. I'd been Jaina Christian for so long, and the kids had the same last name, that I didn't see any point in going back to Jaina Helms. I sighed. Listen, Jan. She raised her hand to interrupt me. Todd, you already said everything in your letter. Plus, the fact that you collected all these photos of me, Mary, and Jonah was one of the most touching things anyone has ever done for me. It meant so much more to me than words on paper. I admit, I found it ironic that you were asking me to forgive you for something you did under the influence of alcohol. I opened my mouth to clarify, but she raised her hand again. Sorry, I know that I did much worse and did not experience what you experienced then. I had no excuses, and like I said, I still feel terrible about it. Honestly, it's okay, even though most of what you said was probably true. I know you wouldn't have intentionally hurt me if it weren't for these circumstances. Yes, at first I was quite offended and upset, but I quickly calmed down and completely forgave you. Listen, Todd, about this. I can't express how sorry I am for your parents, and I'm even more sorry if you thought I was going to avoid you forever. I just thought you needed to cope with a loss, and I would rather be a hindrance than a help. I was going to give you a few weeks and then get back in touch like I did today. I had no idea that Eva and Aiden were ignoring you too. I swear if I had known, I would have talked to them. I may have mentioned to them that you said something nasty the night I saw you at the bar. But I also said that you were in great distress, and I decided to give you some time. I even advised them to go to you, but Aiden said that you didn't want to see them. That's why I thought you were communicating. Honestly, I'll talk to them tonight." I shrugged. I left that day without telling them anything. Then he asked you to pick them up without explaining anything to either Eve or Aiden. I can't blame them for thinking I didn't want to be around. Jan covered my hand with hers. You were in shock to suddenly lose both your parents. I understand it, and they will understand it when I explain it. How are you now? Deborah says you don't look like someone who has just suffered such a loss. I shrugged. It's normal now, but at times, when there is nothing to do, it becomes difficult. How are you? I know you were very close to your mom. You, too, are experiencing loss. Jan shrugged slightly. I think the same as you. I have good friends here who support me, and of course my children. I'm so sorry you're not as close to Aiden and Eve anymore. I know that over the years you have become further apart from each other, but to learn from your letter that they were ignoring you was terrible for me. She paused and added, Todd, that's one of the reasons I asked you to meet. I was going to leave a note this morning, but I got distracted by yours, Jan continued. It's good that Deborah and I exchanged numbers. Yes, I found out that you and her are quite friendly, I said almost sarcastically, still not entirely happy that I was played, even with good intentions. She's really nice. I think we could be good friends, Jan began, but then she closed her eyes and shook her head slightly. You're distracting me. About the note, Todd, I went to see a lawyer to change our divorce agreement. You are freed from child support from this moment, and custody of the children will now be joint. She took an envelope from her purse and handed it to me. You'll probably want someone to look at this, but I hope you'll sign. We can alternate every week or two as soon as you're ready. We'll need to meet again to discuss the details, if that's okay with you. Joint custody. Now will my children live with me half the time? All those moments that I missed over the years, now I won't miss any more. I was surprised that I didn't cry, and he was surprised that Jan didn't cry either. Of course, thank you. Jan, this is the best news I've had in a long time. Jan smiled in a way I hadn't seen in a long time, a smile that could light up the entire room. That was one of the things that attracted me so much to her, besides her gorgeous figure. Since we got divorced, the only time I've seen that smile was at Aiden's graduation. Well, the kids need to learn again what a great father you can be. I wish I had done this sooner, she said. Looking at this amazing smile, I couldn't help but think out loud. Wow. Jan looked at me with slight confusion. What? I blinked and shook my head. Sorry, I just forgot what an amazing smile you have. She looked both flattered and embarrassed. Her cheeks turned slightly pink, and she looked like she was about to say something, but didn't. I broke the awkward silence. Jan, you don't need to apologize for every little thing. I've made bad decisions the last few years too. It's not all your fault. I'm sorry that I let your mistake that night cause me to basically push everyone away except my parents. Todd, you were right. I already said that I deserved this and more. Divorcing you, yes, it was the right decision for me at that moment. But leaving the city and living like a middle-aged teenager in his parents' house was stupid. The same goes for ignoring you for so long that it cost me so many moments in my children's lives. These were terrible mistakes. Jan frowned. I need to go back to work. I don't think I can continue this conversation now. Where do you work now? I asked. I heard from children several years ago that she left her previous place. Oh yeah, I guess you wouldn't know, she replied with a slight shrug. After several of my colleagues saw those photos on the internet, I was too ashamed to go back there. So I left. I tried working in retail, can you imagine? But she didn't stay anywhere for long. I started doing photography as a freelancer. This helped us make ends meet. And then, when Colette started talking to me again, she helped me get a job in the college finance department. I'm just a clerk, but I've taken a few online courses and hope to get promoted in the coming years. She paused and added, Sorry, I asked Dawn not to say anything. Although we work in different buildings, we are technically colleagues now. Jan, I told you to stop apologizing for everything. This is cool. I'm really happy for you, I said and waved my hand. 4 years without any contact. We don't know each other anymore. I wouldn't say that. I know you, Todd, Jan said, almost snorting. You knew, but no longer. I think I've changed, and not for the better. But you have definitely changed for the better. I took a breath. Can you take the afternoon off today? I wish we could get to know each other again. Jan showed no emotion and looked like a deer in headlights for a moment. I had no idea what she was thinking. I realized that what I proposed sounded more intimate than just the coexistence of ex-spouses as parents, and I really meant it. After a 20-second pause, she picked up the phone and dialed a number. Hello, Mark. Remember what I said about today? Well, I definitely decided to take a day off. Thanks, and so did I. Bye. I just raised an eyebrow. Mark is now director of finance. I'm sure you'll meet him soon. He just said he hopes everything goes well. Jan smiled with a hint of flirtation and folded her hands. So, Todd Christian, tell me about yourself. If you're so different from the man I'm still in love with. I sighed. Once again, the divorce and its reasons are on your conscience, but the way I lived after it is on me. As you can see, I stopped working out completely, although I started again last weekend. I had no career ambitions and thought I would just enjoy life because I was free. Free? Did you feel like I stopped you from doing what you wanted when we were married? Jan looked a little offended. No, time with you and the children before I found that damn message on the computer, these are still the happiest moments of my life. As I said, I almost regressed into a teenager with constant nagging from my parents. Tears came to my eyes from the last word. I worked at the first job that came my way, but it was just a salary. I didn't put my soul into it. I didn't have many friends because I left everyone we knew here. Me too. I couldn't face someone who I thought knew how I cheated on you. Yes, but it was my fault. I spread those photos to hurt you, and it hurt me as much as it hurt you because I couldn't see anyone either. But you became a cool single mom, and I was the guy who went out to bars 2 or 3 times a week and went home with any halfway attractive woman who agreed to spend the night with me because I didn't want anything more. I said this to point out my shortcomings, but judging by her face, it hurt her. For a moment, I forgot that the last time she saw me, I was ready to leave with one of these women. You don't have to worry about it. We weren't married, Jan said in a soft voice. When I saw you in the bar, obviously ready to leave with that prostitute, my first thought was, she's not even close to as beautiful as me. How can he be with her when he could be with me? I felt like I made it clear that I was still open to sex without strings, despite what I said. And then I realized that the pain that I felt at that moment was probably only a small fraction of what you experienced when you saw me with that bastard. I think that's why your words hit me so hard back then. Okay, part of the reason I gave you space was because I was afraid you'd talk to me like that again. I don't think I could stand it. This time I reached out and touched her hand. Jan, as I wrote in the note, most of what I said that night was a lie. It was completely unfair to blame you for what happened to Mom and Dad. Even if we were still married, they could have been driving that day. Yes, I've had sex with a lot of women, but none of them compare to you. Our 2 nights together after all these years were, without a doubt, the best sex I've had since we ran home for an extended lunch break. I completely forgot about that. Jan giggled and blushed. I don't want to know all the details, but did you do something with these women that we never did? I nodded. Yes, but nothing that I would like to repeat. Jan smiled slightly. I see. I think I just needed physical contact, but as soon as it all started, I realized that this was not enough. You are my first lover in the last year. I raised my eyebrows. You are not the same woman anymore. You've gotten better, I said, holding her hand. You have become sexier, more independent, and more confident. I can't stop saying what an amazing single mother you are. And I am sure that you will never cheat on the one you love again. Todd, only because I already did it, and it cost me everything. Tears appeared in Gina's eyes. And I regret it every minute since then. My goal was clearly not to make her cry, so I cleared my throat. So, Miss Christian, besides not drinking anymore, doing yoga, scrapbooking, becoming a vegetarian, and now working at a college, what can you tell us about yourself? I asked, still holding her hand. For example, tattoos. I never imagined you would do one, let alone 3. I think there are 2 on the hip for children, but what is the one under the left arm? The writing was too small for me to make out, and it's clearly not in English. This is actually my first tattoo. I did it 3 months after our divorce was finalized. This is in Latin, be faithful to him alone, which means be faithful only to him. Jan squeezed my hand and quietly added, this phrase means a lot to me because I still feel guilty for hurting my ex-husband with my stupid actions. Initially, I probably wanted to punish myself, as if branding myself as a cheater. But in the end, I realized that this phrase was better than a scarlet letter and would be a reminder of what I had done. It hurts because I still love him. I want to improve my relationship with him, mainly for the sake of our children, but also because I miss him very much. He was not only my ideal lover, but also my best friend. I would give anything to go back in time and talk myself out of going out drinking with that bitch Jalen. Going back to the past is impossible. What happened, happened, I said, taking a deep breath. I still believe that we are no longer the same people we were when we were married. But I would like to get to know you better, what you have become now. Jaina's eyes opened wide. You mean like on a date? I shrugged, looking at our hands still intertwined with each other. Isn't this it? I think there's a let's get to know each other again vibe to the whole thing. Jan burst into tears. Oh, Todd. I mean dating slowly. We may have to revisit the past. I'm not sure how well I've dealt with that. I sighed heavily. I'm still looking for my place to live, and I want to take my time. If that means no sex, then I'm sorry, but the answer is no, Jan blurted out. I won't start a relationship with you if we can't make love right away. I've been without this for too long. I was stunned for a moment, and then said, I, uh, I meant maybe without sleepovers and without giving the kids false hopes. I don't want any offense if something doesn't work out for us. Well, except for continuing to pamper you with my cooking. And I'm ready to try whatever you want in bed, except involving other people. Anything to make you want to stay with me forever. I ran my hand along her calf, then higher to her knee, and quietly whispered in response. And when are you going to do it? Whenever possible. But let's start at your house as soon as we can get there. Over the next 9 months, Jan tried to fulfill everything she promised, both with food and sex. If this sounds like a fairy tale, it's not. I still had flashbacks from time to time about what happened in that bathroom, and I twice accused her of sleeping with another man like her boss, Mark. Jan showed angelic patience with my mood swings. Instead of getting defensive or calling me paranoid, she would let me feel the rage and then start discussing what she could do so that I would have no reason to distrust her. Although I didn't ask for it, after my first episode, she stopped going anywhere without me. Jan became friends with Deborah, which helped because we started spending a lot of time with her and her husband, Matt. Matt was a little older than me, but we had a lot in common, including jealousy of our beautiful wives when they interacted with male colleagues. All 4 of us became close and spent a lot of time together. Even though we tried to keep our relationship a secret, I'm confident that within just a few weeks, Ava and Aiden realized that Jaina and I were dating. It was strange to hear Eva call her mother my girlfriend, but that's exactly what Jan was to me. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.